Hey, Simon here, and today I want to talk about fishies and fish tanks. In general, fish tanks are pretty cool to make because you can add a lot of detail, and even if something doesn't look perfect, you can hide it by adding some water distortion or some bubbles or some underwater plants. And for X Rebirth, I had to do such an aquarium, and this is the solution I came up with. I just put a fish texture on a cylindrical shape and moved the texture along it. And as you can see, when the fish hits the side of the cylinder, it looks a bit flat. But as I mentioned, I tried to cover it up by placing some underwater plants. And what was also really interesting to me is that the fish folds pretty abrupt when it hits the corner of the cylinder polygons. But in my eyes, this even adds a bit to how fishes move in the real world, where they also sometimes change their direction very fast. And when I was playing Batman, I saw this fish tank. And here the technology to let the fish move is different. They used particles. Here you can see that they move from left to right and not only in circles like in my example. And if you have a closer look, you may notice that these fishes aren't flat particle shapes but made out of real geometry. It's always an interesting question how such geometry particles disappear, because you can see it in some games that geometry particles with non-translucent materials don't fade out smoothly, but instead are scaled down to make them disappear. And this is exactly what also happens in the Batman game. I guess this is because of engine limitations to make a solid material half transparent, or avoiding sorting problems, or maybe in the case of the Batman game they just didn't like the idea of fishes disappearing like a ghost. And in that case, I don't think that this is a big problem, because in my eyes, the aquarium setting works to our favor here. Because if you look at the aquarium as a whole, you can see that the front glass is bent, and therefore it looks almost a bit like a magnifying glass, so that naturally the fishes in the center part are bigger than the ones on the sides. And there is another aquarium in the same game, but with a slightly different technique. Again, they used particles to get some life into the fish tank, but as you can see, we have a bit more free and random and happy fishes swimming around. And in this case, the particles are just flat particles and not real geometries, but I don't think that you would need more because of the milk glass. You can't see much detail anyway. And what was also really interesting, that in this case, the particles don't fade out either. And as you can see here, the particles get scaled too, but only in one axis, so that it gets flatter and flatter. In this example, I think it might look better to smoothly fade out the particle, so that it looks like the fish would swim deeper into the water of the aquarium. But to be honest, it's a detail which not many players would notice anyway, because while playing the game, you just run by the aquarium and only see it for a split second. Okay, these are the 3 aquariums I wanted to show you to present some different technologies of bringing life to it. But here I have some extra information about fishes in games, which I found interesting. First, in Warcraft 3, you can see this sea monster crawling through the main screen. And as you can see, it shows its back above the water surface. And if you want to get something like that too, you don't need a complex rig or doing some crazy animations, as long as the water is not translucent. Because as you can see here, they did it with a really simple round fish geometry where only the tail is rigged, but I really like the simplicity of that effect. And the next extra tip is interesting when it comes to fishes with big eyes, which can look around dynamically. At first this doesn't sound like a complicated issue. Just put the fish on one layer and the pupils on another layer, and then the problem is solved. But when the fish shall be able to close his eyes, you would expect that the eyelid hides the pupil. But the problem is that the pupils are on the topmost layer, so if the fish would close the eyes, this animation would be stored in the fish texture, and therefore the eyelid would be rendered below the pupil. And this problem is solved by removing the pupil layer for some animation states in which the fish don't need to look around dynamically. So as you see here, the pupil layer gets removed and the pupils are now rendered directly into the animated fish texture. And here you can see several animation states, one after another, and you will see that some of them have the pupils rendered into the texture and some don't. And in the latter case, the pupils are added with the extra layer I just mentioned, and in these days the fish is able to look around as much as he wants. And another interesting point is, from where does the code know where the eyeballs end? So does the code don't move the pupil out of the boundaries of the eyeball? And the trick is that the code doesn't move the pupil at all. The code just rotates it, and the pupils are mapped onto a plane, and the pivot of that plane is a bit offset, so that you only need to rotate it to change the direction of where the fish is looking at. That's it. I really hope you found something useful and you like what you saw. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback, feel free to drop a comment or write me on Twitter or an email. And if you have other examples for aquariums and fishes in games which you really like, then just tell me. I would love to add this as an update to my article. Bye.